When the blizzard swallowed the Bitterroot Mountains, panic became the deadliest element. 2 men fed their desperation, burning through a week's worth of firewood in a single night. The third man, he barely used a handful of twigs. His secret wasn't the bigger fire, it was the rocks. The forecast had promised clear skies and crisp autumn air, the kind of weather that made a late-season backcountry elk hunt in Idaho's Bitterroot Mountains a tradition for Leonard Paul and his 2 colleagues, Derek Gallagher and Liam Reed. They were experienced enough to know the trails, but not quite seasoned enough to respect how violently the alpine microclimates could turn. It started on the 3rd afternoon. The temperature plummeted 15 degrees in 20 minutes. A heavy bruised purple sky rolled over the jagged peaks, swallowing the sun. Within an hour, the first flakes began to fall, not the gentle, drifting kind, but hard horizontal pellets of ice driven by a howling 30-mile-per-hour wind. They were navigating a treacherous scree field at 6,000 feet when disaster struck. Liam, struggling against the sudden gale, lost his footing. He didn't fall far, just a 10-foot slide down a gravel chute, but his Osprey Aether backpack snagged on a jagged piece of shale, tearing the straps. In a desperate bid to catch his balance, he let it go. They watched in stunned silence as the pack tumbled over the edge of a steeper ravine, bouncing off outcroppings until it vanished into the whiteout below. Along with the pack went their primary 4-season tent, their MSR Whisper Light stove, and crucially, the Garmin InReach satellite communicator. "We have to go down after it," Liam shouted, his voice barely cutting through the wind. His face was already pale, his Gore-Tex jacket snapping violently. "It's gone, Liam," Leonard yelled back, grabbing his friend's shoulder. Leonard was a structural engineer by trade, a man who viewed the world through the lens of physics and load-bearing realities. He looked down the sheer drop. "If we try to climb down there in this ice, we're going to break our necks. We need to find cover, now." They had Leonard's pack and Derek's. Between them, they had 2 lightweight summer tarps, 3 emergency Mylar bivvies, a Fiskars X7 hatchet, a silky folding saw, and whatever high-calorie snacks were stuffed in their hip pockets. It was 4 p.m. In an hour, it would be pitch black, and the temperature was rapidly approaching 0. They retreated to the tree line, plunging into a dense stand of lodgepole pines. The canopy offered some relief from the driving snow, but the cold was a living, breathing entity, gnawing at their extremities. Panic is a contagious disease, and Leonard could see it taking root in Derek's eyes. Derek, a commercial real estate broker used to aggressively tackling problems head-on, immediately unclipped the Fiskars hatchet. "We need a fire," Derek declared, his teeth already chattering. "A massive fire. We need to cut down everything dead we can find. If we keep the fire big enough, we'll survive the night. We'll take turns feeding it." Leonard shook his head, scanning their immediate surroundings. "Derek, look around. There's deadfall? Yes, but it's soaked from the snowmelt, and the dry stuff underneath is limited. We don't have the calories or the daylight to stockpile enough wood for a bonfire. If we build a massive fire in the open, 90% of the convective heat is going straight up into the sky. We'll burn through all the accessible wood by 2 a.m., and then we'll freeze." "What's your brilliant plan, Leonard?" "Math it to death," Derek snapped, his fear manifesting as anger. "Fire equals heat. More wood equals more fire. I'm not freezing to death out here because you want to be economical. I want to build a thermal trap," Leonard explained, keeping his voice painfully calm. He pointed to a massive granite outcropping about 50 yards away. It was a sheer face of rock, naturally undercut, forming a slight C-shape. "I'm going to set up my tarp as an awning against that rock. I'll build a small fire between me and the stone. The granite acts as a thermal mass. It absorbs the infrared heat and radiates it back. The tarp traps the rising air. I won't need a bonfire. I'll need a fraction of the wood you will." "You're insane," Liam stammered, wrapping his arms around himself. "I'm with Derek. I want to see a fire. A big one." The fracture was immediate and irreversible. Survival situations strip away societal niceties in minutes. Derek and Liam claimed a small clearing surrounded by pines. They worked feverishly, burning precious calories to drag massive waterlogged logs and dead branches into a giant pile. Leonard quietly separated from them. He trudged through the deepening snow to the granite outcropping. The rock was freezing to the touch, a massive slab of ancient stone. He got to work. First, he used his hands and his boots to clear the snow away from the base of the rock, exposing the dry earth beneath. Next, he strung up his lightweight tarp, using paracord tied to two adjacent pines, angling it down at a 45-degree slope toward the ground, leaving a 3-foot gap between the bottom edge of the tarp and the base of the granite wall. Then he gathered stones, not wood, but stones. He spent 30 minutes pulling fist-sized rocks from the frozen dirt, arranging them in a tight U-shape directly against the massive granite wall. This was his fire lay. Only then did he take the folding saw and begin harsting wood. He didn't look for massive logs. He looked for wrist-thick branches of dead standing pine. He gathered only what he could carry in 2 armloads, a pitifully small amount compared to the mountain of timber Derek and Liam were assembling. By 6 p.m. darkness was absolute. Across the trees, Leonard saw the brilliant, blinding flare of Derek and Liam's fire. They'd used fire starters and a mountain of pine needles to get it going. It roared to life, flames leaping 6 feet into the air. Leonard could hear them cheering, a hollow, desperate sound swallowed by the howling wind. Leonard knelt in the small shelter. He struck a ferro rod, catching a nest of dry birch bark he'd kept in his pocket. He fed it tiny twigs, then slightly larger ones, building a modest, controlled fire inside his U-shaped rock ring right against the granite wall. The first hour was miserable. The ambient temperature was 10 degrees Fahrenheit. The wind chill made it feel like 30 degrees Fahrenheit. Derek and Liam were sitting practically on top of their bonfire, rotating their bodies like rotisserie chickens. Their fronts were scorching hot, their synthetic jackets smoking, while their backs were freezing. Leonard, however, sat cross-legged under his angled tarp, his back to the nylon fabric, facing the small fire and the massive stone wall. For the first hour, he shivered violently. The fire seemed too small, too weak, but Leonard understood thermodynamics. He wasn't relying on the hot air, convection, which immediately rises and blows away. He was waiting for the radiant heat. By 8 p.m., the magic happened. The massive granite slab had been soaking up the heat from his small concentrated fire. The stone face began to warm. The fist-sized rocks he had arranged around the fire were practically glowing. The heat hit the granite face, bounced backward, washing over Leonard. The angled tarp behind him caught any warm air trying to escape upward and rolled it back down over his shoulders. He was inside an oven of his own making. While the storm raged inches away, the air inside Leonard's small pocket of space was a comfortable 55 degrees Fahrenheit. He took off his heavy gloves. He unzipped his jacket halfway. He fed a single, wrist-thick stick into the fire every 45 minutes. The coals nestled in the hot rocks burned intensely, requiring very little fuel to maintain their output. 100 yards away, the dynamic was fatally different. Derek and Liam's monster fire was a beast that demanded constant feeding. Because they had built it in the open, the wind continuously whipped the flames, accelerating the combustion. By midnight, the massive pile of wood they had exhausted themselves. Gathering was reduced to a bed of ash and a few stubborn smoking logs. "We need more wood," Derek yelled, his voice ragged. "I can't feel my feet, Derek," Liam sobbed. "I can't go out there." The snow was now thigh-deep. Leaving the immediate radius of their dying fire to search for wood in the pitch-black wilderness was a death sentence. They had burned through their immediate fuel supply in 6 hours. They had nothing left. As the flames died down, the brutal reality of the open air slammed into them. The cold was absolute. Leonard dozed in his shelter. His fire had burned down to embers, but the massive granite wall was now a giant radiating radiator. It pushed a continuous wave of heavy, dry heat outward. He woke periodically, placed 2 small sticks on the coals, and closed his eyes again. Around 3 a.m., the wind dropped, replaced by a terrifying, silent, deep freeze. The temperature plummeted to 18 degrees Fahrenheit. Leonard was jolted awake by a sound. It wasn't the wind. It was a chaotic, stumbling crash through the brush. He grabbed his hatchet, his heart pounding, and peered around the edge of his tarp. Emerging from the darkness, illuminated only by the faint red glow of Leonard's coals, was a nightmare. It was Derek. He was covered in snow, his face a ghostly blue, his eyes wide and unseeing. He was dragging Liam by the collar of his jacket. Liam wasn't moving. Fire. Derek croaked, his voice barely a whisper. Hours. Died. Wood's gone. Leonard didn't hesitate. Get in here. Under the tarp now. Derek practically collapsed into the small space. Leonard grabbed Liam and hauled him out of the snow. Liam's skin was ice cold. He was in the dangerous, lethargic secondary stage of hypothermia. His eyes were half open, pupils dilated. Worse, his jacket was unzipped, paradoxical undressing, a terrifying sign that his brain was misinterpreting the freezing as extreme heat. Help me zip him up, Leonard commanded, kicking his own sleeping pad toward the men to get them off the frozen ground. Derek was shaking so violently he couldn't manipulate the zipper. It's so small, Derek stammered, staring at Leonard's tiny pile of coals. We're going to die. It's not big enough. Put your hands toward the rock, Leonard ordered. Derek, delirious and weeping, reached his hands out. He gasped. Despite the tiny fire, the wall of heat radiating from the granite slab was immense. It was a physical force. Leonard moved quickly. He took 3 of the fist-sized rocks from the fire ring. They were dangerously hot, but not glowing, wrapped them in spare wool socks, and placed them into Liam's armpits and groin. The localized, intense heat to the major arteries is a critical backcountry treatment for severe hypothermia. Next, Leonard took the emergency mylar blankets Derek and Liam had forgotten to use in their panic. He wrapped them around the 2 men, reflecting the ambient heat of the rock wall back onto their bodies. Finally, he placed his last 3 pieces of wrist-thick wood onto the coals. The fire flared up. The rock absorbed. The space beneath the tarp tightened into a life-saving pocket of warmth. For the next 4 hours, Leonard played doctor and stoker. He watched as the violent shivering slowly returned to Liam, a good sign, meaning his body was fighting back. He watched Derek stare at the solid stone wall, the aggressive broker completely humbled by the quiet, immutable laws of physics. I burned it all, Derek whispered around 6:10 a.m., the first gray light of dawn filtering through the trees. I chopped until I couldn't lift my arms. We burned it all in hours, and you. You just used the mountain. A fire doesn't care how big it is, Derek, Leonard said softly, handing him a canteen of water he had melted near the coals. It only cares where the heat goes. You tried to heat the sky, I just heated the rock. When the morning finally broke, the storm had passed. The bitter roots were cast in a blinding, pristine white, utterly silent. The temperature remained brutally cold, but the sun was out. Leonard knew they couldn't hike out. Liam was far too weak, and Derek had frost upon his fingers and toes. But luck, for the first time in 48 hours, was on their side. When Liam's pack had tumbled down the ravine, the Garmin and reach inside it hadn't shattered immediately. Upon impact, the emergency SOS button had triggered, sending a single corrupted location ping before the battery died from the cold. It wasn't an exact coordinate, but it was enough to alert the local authorities that 3 registered hunters were in distress. At 10:30 a.m., the unmistakable rhythmic chopping of rotor blades shattered the alpine silence. Leonard crawled out from beneath the tarp. A yellow and blue Bell 47 helicopter, bearing the insignia of the Ravalli County Search and Rescue, was banking over the tree line. Leonard grabbed his orange emergency bivvy and waved it wildly in the clearing. Pilot Harrison spotted the flash of orange immediately. He hovered over the clearing, kicking up a massive cloud of powder, before gently touching the skids down in a shallow drift. Deputy Sheriff Miller jumped out, medically trained and moving with practiced urgency. He trudged through the deep snow toward Leonard. "You the Paul party," Miller shouted over the rotors. "Yes, 2 men inside, severe cold exposure, but stable," Leonard yelled back. Miller ducked under the tarp. He assessed Derek and Liam, checking pulses and core temperatures. He looked at the tiny pile of white ash against the massive, dry patch of earth, and then felt the residual heat still coming off the granite outcropping. He looked back at Leonard, a slow nod of professional respect forming. "I saw the scorch mark in the clearing over there," Miller said, pointing his thumb over his shoulder. "Looked like a bomb went off. Figured I'd find frozen bodies next to a dead bonfire." "Who built this rig?" "I did," Leonard said. "You saved their lives," Miller stated matter-of-factly. "A few more hours in the open, and your friends would be statistics. Let's get them in the bird." It took 20 minutes to securely load Liam and Derek into the helicopter. As Leonard climbed in last, he took one final look back at his camp. The tarp was down, packed away. All that remained was a small crescent of stones against the towering wall of granite. It looked insignificant. It looked like nothing at all against the vast, unforgiving expanse of the Bitterroot Wilderness. But Leonard knew the truth. Survival isn't about fighting nature with brute force. It's about understanding her rules and making them work for you. The mountain provides the cold, but if you're smart enough to listen, it also provides the cure. If this survival breakdown kept you on the edge of your seat, hit that like button and share this video with your outdoor crew. It might just save a life. Subscribe for more intense, real-world survival breakdowns, gear tips, and wilderness strategies. Drop a comment below. Would you have built the bonfire or the reflector wall? Stay safe and see you next time.